Deep in the desert of Sudan, there are more pyramids than in all of Egypt. Most people have never even heard of them. They belong to a kingdom that conquered pharaohs, faced down Rome, and then vanished, leaving behind a language no one can read. This is the story of Kush, an African empire that stood beside history's most famous civilization, refusing to live in its shadow. For nearly 1,500 years, it thrived, adapted, and defied the greatest powers of the ancient world with remarkable resilience. Around 1070 BCE, as Egypt's new kingdom collapsed into chaos, a new kingdom emerged along the Nile, south of the First Cataract. The Egyptians called this land Ta-Seti, the land of the bow, because Kushite archers were legendary, their skills unmatched across the region. Kush was far more than warriors. While Egypt fractured, the Kushites built their own cities, temples, and distinctive culture. At Nubia, beneath sacred Jebel Barkal, they raised pyramids that echoed Egypt's grandeur, yet belonged entirely to Nubia. They worshipped their own gods alongside Egyptian ones and developed trade networks reaching deep into Africa's vibrant heartland. This forged a civilization that borrowed from Egypt but never submitted. It was a conversation between equals, carved in stone and gold. For centuries, Egypt and Kush existed side by side, sometimes trading, sometimes warring, always watching each other intently. Then, in the 8th century BCE, everything changed. Kush decided it was time to remind Egypt who its powerful neighbor truly was. Around 747 BCE, Pi, a Kushite king, looked north, seeing Egypt divided, weakened, and its sacred temples falling into ruin. The gods were neglected, map broken, so Pi made a decision that would echo through history. He would march north and restore Egypt. This wasn't mere conquest. Pi saw himself as Egypt's savior, the true heir to the pharaohs and their ancient legacy. His army swept north, capturing city after city. Egyptian rulers finally surrendered, kneeling before a king from the land of the bow. Kush had conquered Egypt. Pi and his successors became Egypt's 25th dynasty, ruling from both Nubia and Thebes. They restored Karnak's great temples, revived old rituals, presenting themselves as more Egyptian than the Egyptians, pharaohs who remembered what Egypt had forgotten. For nearly a century, Kushite pharaohs wore the double crown. They built monuments and commissioned statues with their names inscribed. Taharka, one of Pi's successors, became so powerful that he is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible challenging Assyria. But power always attracts enemies. To the northeast, the Assyrian Empire was expanding, brutal and relentless, wielding iron weapons. They looked at Egypt, rich, ancient, prestigious, and decided it would be theirs. Standing in their way were the Kushite pharaohs. The Assyrians invaded in waves, their armies equipped with cavalry and siege engines. Taharka fought back fiercely. But the Assyrian war machine was overwhelming. By 656 BCE, Kushites were driven from Egypt. Retreating south beyond the cataracts, their dynasty ended. For most empires, this would be the end, a footnote in history, a civilization that rose, failed, and then faded. But Kush didn't fade. They retreated to their heartland, regrouped, and made a choice to rebuild on their own terms. The Kushites moved their capital south to Meroe, beyond the Fifth Cataract, far from Assyrian reach and Egyptian memory. There, along the Nile, they created something extraordinary, a kingdom that would outlast pharaohs, outlast Assyrians, and eventually face Rome itself. Meroe became a center of innovation. Kushites discovered they were sitting on some of Africa's richest iron deposits. They built furnaces, smelted and mastered ironworking on an industrial scale. The desert filled with slag heaps forging their future. Iron tools, iron weapons, iron trade goods. Meroe became the Birmingham of the ancient world, an industrial powerhouse. It controlled trade routes stretching from Africa's interior to the Mediterranean and Red Sea ports to India. Kush was no longer in Egypt's shadow. And they kept building pyramids, smaller than Egypt's, steeper and distinct. In fact, they built more of them. Over 200 pyramids rose at Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru, creating their own architectural legacy, one tomb at a time. Gold, ivory, ebony, incense, exotic animals. Kushite merchants moved these treasures along the Nile and across the vast desert. They traded with Greeks, Persians, and later with Rome. The kingdom grew wealthy through commerce, controlling goods between Africa and the Mediterranean. Kush developed a unique political system where queens, known as Kandakes, held real power, not just ceremonial titles. They ruled, commanded armies, and built monuments. Kushite queens sat on thrones, making decisions that shaped the destiny of nations. For centuries, Kush thrived in relative peace. its wealth growing, its culture blending African, Egyptian, and Hellenistic influences. But in 30 BCE, Rome annexed Egypt. Suddenly, the world's most powerful empire became Kush's northern neighbor, and Rome rarely respected borders. The Romans looked south and saw land to tax, people to subjugate, and resources to exploit. They pushed into Nubia. Establishing garrisons and demanding tribute, Romans assumed Kush would bend the knee like others. They assumed wrong, because they hadn't met Amanirenas yet. Candace Amanirenas was ruling Kush when Rome came knocking, and she was not at all interested in submission. Described as a fierce warrior queen, some say she lost an eye. When Roman forces pushed too far, she gathered her army and struck back. In 25 BCE, Kushite forces swept north, attacking Roman garrisons in southern Egypt. They sacked Syene and pushed on to Philae. At Aswan, they found statues of Emperor Augustus. Amanirenas' forces toppled his bronze statue, then carried it back to Meroe. They buried the statue beneath the temple entrance, so everyone entering would walk over the face of Rome's emperor. It was a message written in stone and bronze. Kush would not be intimidated. Rome could conquer Egypt, but Nubia fought back. Rome retaliated, sending legions south under Prefect Petronius. The war raged for 3 brutal, costly, inconclusive years. Neither side could achieve total victory. The unforgiving desert and thin supply lines meant Rome now fought on Kush's terms. Finally, in 21 or 20 BCE, Amanirenas sent envoys to Samos to negotiate directly with Augustus himself. The terms were remarkable. Rome would withdraw forces, abandon tribute, and establish the border at Aswan. Kush had negotiated as an equal. Consider this: Rome, the empire that crushed Carthage, subjugated Gaul, and made the Mediterranean its own, backed down from Kush. The one-eyed queen stood against legions and won not just a battle, but a diplomatic victory, securing her kingdom's independence. For 3 centuries, Kush and Rome coexisted in wary peace. Trade continued, diplomacy functioned, and the border at Aswan held firm. The kingdom of Meroe remained independent, its pyramids rising, its culture flourishing, merchants traveling routes that connected continents. Kush was developing its own written language. For centuries, they had used Egyptian hieroglyphs, borrowing the script of their northern neighbor. Around the 2nd century BCE, they created Meroitic, a new script, phonetic and distinct, appearing on temples, tombs, and stele. Scholars recognize the letters and have identified the sounds each symbol represents, but the language itself remains locked. We can read the script, yet cannot understand the words. Hundreds of inscriptions, carved in stone, remain silent, refusing their secrets. Around 350 CE, the Kingdom of Kush collapsed. Reasons are debated, including climate change, overgrazing, and Aksumite invasion from the east. Whatever the cause, one of Africa's greatest civilizations faded into silence, leaving more pyramids than Egypt and an unreadable language. For over 14 centuries, Kush stood as a power that rivaled empires, conquered pharaohs, and stared down Rome itself. Yet most of the world has never heard its name. It makes you wonder, what other empires are still waiting to be remembered?